Welcome everybody. Welcome to this newest episode of the series Off, where we'll be digging into climate tech investments, its landscape, its future, and so forth. We've had several sessions before on different verticals, and this is the latest and newest addition to a Startup Wise Guys vertical. And for this, we will be joined by an esteemed guest, where I hope that he will be able to join us. There's been a couple of technical issues that he needed to solve just 2 minutes before the call, unfortunately, but he will be joining us just in a minute. So there you are, Guillaume. So welcome, Guillaume. So that's good. You're joining us just in time. So we'll try to make this this session as collaborative as possible. So if you have any questions or if you have any comments or anything that you would like to share with us, please feel free to write it down in the chat section, and we'll be taking those questions as we go. So as I was saying, we were joined by Guillaume. I met Guillaume a couple of months back in London at an event, and we had the pleasure of sharing onto all those new climate tech investments at pre-seed and seed level. And that has been very informative, and so we thought it would be great to have this conversation open to others and try to promote it to beyond or to companies. So Guillaume is a seasoned entrepreneur with a background in consultancy, and is currently the founder and the CEO of Startup Basecamp. And Guillaume, could you tell us a bit more about yourself and a bit onto how you came into entrepreneurship?
Yes, for sure. Thank you so much, Max, for having me. Usually I'm sitting at your seat, I would say, as the moderator of our podcast show that we have as well. Not doing live stream, so hopefully I would say on the technicalities it would work well. But thank you so much for having me here with you. So basically, to give you a little bit of background about myself. So I'm a Belgian citizen. Worked at PwC first, and then from there decided in 2013 to move to San Francisco and the Silicon Valley in itself. So my time at PwC was very interesting, and then I did a shortcut into the bank environment as well as a consultant. And I was really impressed by how companies and people in the auditing and consulting sides were working in the different companies. And I don't know, I feel like probably it gave me a little bit of like extra push to move into the entrepreneurship journey in itself and go crossing the Atlantic and see what is beyond the European ecosystem in itself. So happy to definitely share a little bit about my journey there. Before the start of this, new focus that we have now in terms of climate tech.
That's very nice. So you're saying that you started the idea of entrepreneurship started in the Silicon Valley, and now you're back in Europe. Do you see similarities in between those two regions? Is there a lot that we can learn, or at least that you're applying within a Startup Bootcamp, your company, that you can apply all those learnings from Silicon Valley back to Europe?
Yeah. So, I mean, maybe let's just step back a little bit about like this whole, I would say, entrepreneurship journey, because more than mine, I've been exposed to more than 3,000 founders that we supported landing like me in Silicon Valley. So at first, Startup Basecamp was really like to fulfill my own needs as an international entrepreneur moving to the Silicon Valley ecosystem. What I found there was quite challenging in terms of like support system, having like a place to stay, and then like having access to different investors, but also founders and people working for the different big companies. But the initial story of Startup Basecamp started really by supporting founders at core, landing to the Silicon Valley. International founders, we had a chance to collaborate, as I mentioned, with more than 3,000 of them from more than 85 different countries. So a lot of those early stage founders, seed, pre-seed, coming to the Valley to raise capital, attend like YC or founder startups at that time, and really starting to feel like, what does it mean to be an international entrepreneur, being exposed to this, I would say, already winning ecosystem, which was the Silicon Valley back in 2013 and until 2020. Well, I think now things definitely change a little bit based on the echo that I have. But this whole journey in itself allowed me to understand a little bit like what is the difference between this ecosystem and this entrepreneurship mindset and the one that I would say other ecosystem entrepreneurs coming from have in common and the opposite. I think in common, they all have this willingness of like building something that doesn't really exist or that's an improvement of something that exists, but where they have a strong vision about. And that's really like something very key on the early stage in itself. But more than just having a vision, they also have like this je ne sais quoi fire, and we saw that on companies that now IPO'd or get acquired in itself or gain the unicorn status. This je ne sais quoi of this entrepreneur that no matter what, will figure it out which way or in order to adjust and adapt to find a way to grow their business in itself. What I think Americans compared to others, it's like have in terms of like being an entrepreneur, there's also like sometimes this self-confidence. This self-confidence of like being able to dream big and do large, which matter. On the European side, often what I noticed and the way they present their deck, the way they present their company, there's always like this sometimes imposter syndromes, especially for first-time entrepreneurs in itself. And there we could really see that probably the education system in the US is pushing more, I would say, the students to expose themselves to the class, to the way how they collaborate, the way how they speak, the way they're present, and the way how they, in a way, sell their idea, sell their vision. And I think that was really something that we noticed for European and I would say also like Asian entrepreneurs coming to the Silicon Valley. This need to catch up on, even though they have maybe beautiful technology and innovation that they are carrying, they still need to learn how to explain it simply, but also being able to sell it to convince those investors to join them in their journey. So that's kind of like really one of the big takeaways that I saw over there.
Yeah, okay, fair enough. I mean, it's also something we notice across many in many startups. It's also, you're right, that the confidence level is different. Also, English being a first language or not a first language plays out quite a lot. At least in all the startups we're seeing, it just like it plays as a key advantage whenever they have English as a first language. But now digging into like the sustainability climate as we are talking about today. How come you came into that vertical? Because of course you were helping quite a lot of entrepreneurs from a wide spectrum, but now you reduced it to more climate tech focused. Could you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, definitely. So it always goes back to that initial story, and I think I see my entrepreneurship journey as a constant like evolution from starting in an apartment, growing the concept to this co-living hotel, and then in 2020 the year was very interesting. At first, I became a dad, so that was a very exciting part of my year. And 3 months later, the world also gave birth to this little virus called COVID-19. Which had a direct impact on what we were doing. As we started Basecamp, we were supporting in-person activities and founders coming to the Silicon Valley. As you can imagine, the travel ban stopped everything. And we found ourselves in this interesting situation where we knew that we had to move online to be able to continue our activities and leverage this experience that we had to supporting all of those founders along the years and this network that we built internationally as well. But we didn't know if we wanted to be more like on the generalistic startup supporter or if we wanted to be more into a vertical. And at that time, I was getting involved into this group called the Climate Reality Leaders, founded by Al Gore. And speaking with our network of founders, investors, and also employees working at those large corporations in the Silicon Valley, we realized that climate and climate tech was this new emerging category within the tech ecosystem in itself. And for us, like starting to dig into that, we understood that it was in fact the biggest opportunity of mankind to really dig into that and leverage this experience that on one side we earn along the year supporting those founders, but on the other side, providing something that was still missing and emerging as a category, see how we could support those founders at best. And most importantly, I think that's something that I've seen with all the investors and founders that I spoke with. The majority are also animated by this. We want to create very interesting and high profitable business, but at the same time, or support them, but at the same time, we want purpose and we want meaning. And that's where we found ourselves with like leveraging and supporting founders was our experience. And at the same time, we were able to join this category where also fighting climate change was, I would say, like the biggest challenge that our generation and our kid generation are facing. So this two, I would say, aspects combined together pushed us to say, okay, in 2021, we put together a first pitch competition around climate tech for a couple of investors that were willing to give feedback to those companies. And I'm happy after to give you a little bit like more the journey that we did with Startup Basecamp today and our focus on climate tech.
No, of course, and I think it's been very interesting to discover your journey, but also discover one of the tools that you have in your toolbox, which is the new podcast, Tech for Climate, where you do interview quite a lot of leaders within the tech ecosystem, but sometimes also outside of it, successful founders, very good VC, and so different experts in the ecosystem. That has been quite a great thing to listen to, just to discover. So I really advise everybody listening to go on that and really listen to some of those great podcasts that's had. But also, what have been your biggest learnings in listening to all those tech VCs and climate entrepreneurs? And what is there a couple of great learnings that we could share with the audience today?
Yeah, so I think it's interesting, and I covered that a little bit prior to that, but the podcast for us, besides the pitch competition and starting to put this content around to understand who's doing what and share that with the world and build this community, was for us like a great way to have the opportunity to spend like an hour with great investors, as you mentioned, or great founders in the space, and being able to take a few takes away of this format to share that with a community of listeners, and hopefully in the process inspiring them. But on the other side, for Startup Basecamp, it's been like an amazing tool also to build this strong relationship with all of those VCs on both sides of the Atlantic, because that's really the positioning that we also have. And looking at them, and when you speak with people at Fifth Wall Capital, for instance, that have more than $1 billion under management, or people at Extensia on the European side, or Pale Blue Dot, you have the opportunity with those partners is really to understand at first like a piece of the ecosystem in itself, what they are looking at right now, what are they interested and what they are less interested. So I will advise definitely listeners to kind of like dig back into some of those podcasts. But what is the common thread between even the investors and the founders, more than the speaking about like their view of a part of the ecosystem, a part of the climate tech in itself? I felt them all animated by this strong connection with the natural environment and leveraging their own experience that they gain in business. Some became very wealthy based on their previous experience. Some learn a ton of experience as well, joining like high scale-up companies, or joining like early stage Google, Facebook, and others, and leveraging this experience to really put that into the climate tech in itself and trying to support those founders there. And I think that was very interesting for me, is to see this strong connection on one side with this natural environment and these business opportunities that they see, but also finding the way to leverage their experience that they have to empower through capital or simply by the solution that they're bringing to the world, empower the whole, I would say, humankind in itself to fight this climate change in itself. And I think that's really one of the biggest learning that I saw, besides all the technicalities and stuff like that, is really at core, those humans are animated to do good and at the same time do great business in itself. So we're not on the impact non-profit side. We're really with people who are looking to build exciting business at scale, but at the same time providing these interesting, I would say, solutions or supporting those solutions against climate change.
Well, thank you. And I think so for everybody listening, the podcast is called Tech for Climate, and I would definitely advise you to go and dig in and listen into some of the episodes that are really good. So now digging into the content, as you know, this series of the State of is made for some of the programs that we have at the Startup Wise Guys, one being the pre-acceleration program, which is pre-revenue program, and the other one, which is an acceleration program. So really helping founders, entrepreneurs to start growing the business further, and then eventually coming into a stage where Startup Basecamp could be interested in helping them even further down the line. So I think there's a great collaboration that could happen into our two companies. But digging into the main content, climate tech investments have been discussed widely, I think, by a lot of VCs. There's a lot of new capital appearing in Europe, funds focused on climate tech, or at least climate solutions. And so we've seen quite a sharp decline in funding rounds across all stages, not only at seed and pre-seed, but at all stages. And a rebalancing of the valuations over the past 18, 24 months. That has been quite of a tough market for new entrepreneurs and for startups and for survival. What's your view on the status today in Europe? What do you see? How do you see the current landscape from everything you've heard, of everything you read, but also all the startups that you meet? What is your feeling at pre-seed and seed?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's interesting, because I mean, one of the, besides what we're doing with the content creation and the podcast, we started to realize that we're really sitting in between, in the middle of the table. On one side we have investors, on the other side we have founders, and we started to look at how can we connect them both together faster to accelerate the capital deployment towards those climate tech solutions. And that's really the mission of Startup Basecamp today in terms of evolution. Looking at that, and obviously being sitting on the table and speaking with founders and investors, I was preparing the show, and I was looking at a little bit of data, and everybody can do easy. I would say quick Google search in terms of what is the amount of capital that is deployed in the space. And I found for Q3, because Q4 is about to close now, we were around 16 billion. So I think it's still an interesting amount of money. And I will not dig too much in terms of what are the data, are they right, where are we allocating. It sounds that the energy sector is still taking a larger amount of that pie in itself. In terms of more through the discussion and less maybe data oriented, but if you look at the investor side, what we notice is in the value chain of the fundraising journey in itself, the after Series A, when you go to the growth stage, there is a lot of difficulties, and during this year it was definitely the case. I don't know how it's going to be for next year. I don't have a crystal ball, but there is definitely a gap there where other maybe source of funding should be available to help those companies to keep growing. When you look at the earlier stage in itself, I feel that Q1, Q2 was definitely slowing down, and then Q3 after the summer, the activity of fundraising and the VC deploying capital really accelerated again. Why? I believe that because of the uncertainty on the stock market, especially beginning of the year and during this year, where it's not very clear where are we going to. Maybe less liquidity event as well in terms of IPO. All of that made all of those fund manager and capital allocator to kind of like hold back a little bit. Valuation clearly decreased compared to the previous year, which I think is always healthier for the founders and definitely more interesting for the investors in itself. But when you look at this macro trends, it has definitely an impact. Now, if you look at like what is the role of those capital allocator, they also receive management fees, and as point of time they need to deploy capital. So definitely they've been looking at a lot of deals in Q3 and Q4, definitely closing before the end of the year. I feel that Q1 2024 will definitely still be a good time for climate tech startup in itself. Now, looking at this trends and this balance of like, we have this dry powder that you probably saw in Climate Tech VC newsletter, which is a great one that I recommend to everybody who's interested in the space. They mentioned that the dry powder was in Q1, Q2, was still very present there, and definitely capital allocator needed to allocate. Now, on the founder side, when we hear their fundraising journey, because that's what we do since now a year, is we supporting them in terms of fundraising journey. What we realize is like VCs takes longer to deploy the capital, ask more, deeper due diligence, takes longer sometimes to respond. And there is this a little bit like in between situation, we need to deploy, but are we sure or not? And what we saw for 2023 is like VCs are getting a little bit more also, which is interesting, smarter about different subcategories within the ecosystem, meaning that they've been spending more time on deep diving, understanding who's doing what are the potential outcomes, and they still have to, this framework of a VC fund in itself, which is this 10 years timeline, where they are promising to their LPs a 300% return. And when you couple climate tech, which is 70%, I would say, based on what we see on the hardware side, deep tech, and then you have the software component of the climate tech in itself, it's not that easy for them to see that return. So they're really spending more time on with the team to try to understand, and sometimes it can be very exhausting on the founder side because you have this meeting, second meeting, and then this latency time, and then again it goes back, and then they end up by closing the round or not being a good fit. So I feel like for this Q4 now, a lot of founders are a little bit tired of this fundraising and the way of VC sometimes react as well, which is understandable, I would say on both sides. But I feel that 2024, based on how the market will close, definitely there is a push to continue into the investment side with supporting business that are, or I would say startups that are really looking to create a real business, with eventually like the byproduct of that is like a strong climate impact. But I think it's not just about the climate impact, it's also about like, is that a real business? Why? Because otherwise the funds in itself have harder time to in itself justify the return or potential return that they will need to provide to their LPs. I don't know if it answered to the question. It was a long answer.
No. I think it makes a lot of sense. I mean, we see the same at Startup Wise Guys, which things take a little bit longer time. Of course, valuations are down, and so negotiations tend to be a little bit more lengthy than they used to be. It's been a tough past 18 months, I think, for the founders, for all the founders that we have. They struggle sometimes to find a lead investor, even though they have some follow-on investments available. They really struggle to find a lead investor who's willing to take the risk of putting some kind of a term sheet forward and bringing them to the next level. But we definitely saw the same of a little bit of a tough market, probably a rebalance market where it makes a little bit more sense now. So investors are trying to act a little bit more smarter rather than just deploying capital like there's no tomorrow. And so that probably also impacts how founders should behave and strategize around the fundraising. But you touched upon 2024. thinking that eventually the trend will continue going as Q3 and Q4 probably will still be an increase of deployment of capital, even though, you know, PitchBook and all the data, as you said, the real conversations you have versus the hard data that you can check onto the different platforms that are exhaustive or not exhaustive, that is left for another day's discussion. But for those climate tech investments, so you feel that investors are a little bit more confident, a little bit more optimistic. We know that everybody's calling, you know, this dry powder that is there available and eventually not deployed. But do you feel that there's some kind of an optimism growing, and therefore founders should really, climate founders should really push for completing good rounds next year, or what's the sentiment here?
I mean, it's a good question. Again, it's like, you know, just maybe not using a crystal ball, but like the feeling that we see on I mean, capital allocators still need to allocate capital. That's their job. You know what I mean? Now, we mentioned in terms of like what would be the valuation, how easy would it be for founders to get access to that capital? I think there's still a little question mark. I think people are still looking at like now closing down, Q4, Q1. Definitely, if there's no major, I would say, macro events like a new conflict somewhere in the world. I mean, I think Israel clearly like shaked a little bit like this Q4 in itself. If there is no like major event on the stock market and there's still like a stability and we're not going down, I think definitely there's some optimism on the fundraising side. Why? Because there is that capital that in a way needs to be deployed, and on the other side, there's, if you look at it, there's more and more like funds. Even generalist VC funds having a pocket now for climate tech deals as well. More and more new funds, 30 million, 100 million, and so on, to deploy capital in the space. So there's more and more like capital that is allocated. When we look at also the private sectors, there is also like more and more interest from large institutional investors to deploy and access to those climate deals. Why? Because, I mean, today, or we just close up, we're still going on now, but like there's the COP28, you know that the macro trends in terms of like the decarbonization of the economy is the strongest tailwind in any industry that you can have. There is no way around it, and 2023 was the second hottest year of the humankind since we are doing recording, so pre-industrial revolution, so until 1900, and we are reaching now almost 1.5 degrees increase. So looking at the amplification of the strong events in terms of like flood, drought, wildfire, storms, and stuff like that, there is this all like movement slowly pushing the world, I would say, financial world in itself, to really act and to capitalize on those opportunities that the regulator in itself will, in a way, I would say, enforce by the new regulation that are slowly coming into place. Now we have the problem of like the oil industry in itself trying as much as possible to slow down all the process, so it might take longer. But I feel that this all trends, if you look at that on a macro view, is there to stay, is there in a short period of time as well. I mean, 2030, one of the deadline is around the corner. 2050, we're going to be there very, very soon as well. So in the lifespan of like companies that are funded by VCs, it's there. And when you look at climate in itself and climate tech, there's so many different categories that are touched on, that there's so many different opportunities as well. Would all the company win? I don't think so. but some of them will be, as Larry Fink from BlackRock was saying, one of the next $1 trillion company would be a climate company.
Yeah, makes sense. Makes sense. I think that there's a lot that needs to be done, and you addressed it earlier. Climate is of course it's extremely important, but of course they need a business on the side. It cannot just be a wild dream on creating a new solution for the world that is not viable business wise. Otherwise, that wouldn't be fitting into the venture business as we're talking about today, and as all those funds happy to deploy capital into. But yeah, you touched a bit also upon it. You said that, of course, most of the money that has been raised in climate tech has been geared towards energy. There are new forms of creating energy. There's also this big boom in hydrogen and figuring out how to find solutions in Europe. Maybe for the ones, the specific verticals that we are interested in at Startup Wise Guys, which are more towards agriculture, food, and circularity. Maybe there's a bit less food. It's less capital deployed on that front. Even though there are many funds who are willing to also tap into those specific vertical. But do you think that for all those climate entrepreneurs out there, do you think there is some kind of a secret formula, or is there some kind of a story or one of the startups that has been outperforming the market within the climate tech vertical that we could look up to and see, you know, this is the path to follow? Because now we've seen in AI, numbers are just blurring the lines completely. Capital that has been raised by Mistral, which is this French company created in May. Now they're raising $450 million. It's completely insane compared to the capital that is deployed in climate tech. So what would be, instead of putting AI after climate in every single slide of a pitch deck, what would be a secret formula to actually be sustainable over the long term?
Yeah, I think you need to go back a little bit to the fundamentals in itself of like any startups or, you know, early stage companies in itself. I mean, it always boils down at first to Mike, I think we lost you. Oh, it's me. Anyway, I don't know if I'm still live, but I will keep going for the people who are there. So what I was mentioning, it's super important is to go back to the fundamentals in itself. So when you look at the fundamentals for early stage company, it all boils down to at first to who is behind the company, who is the original team in itself. Do they make sense in terms of their Max, can you hear me? I'm sorry, I lost you a little bit for a second.
Yeah, sorry, I just like somehow it just closed down and reopened very quickly.
Okay, so I was keeping going, but I was not sure if I was live or not. So what I was now that you're back here, what I was mentioning, it all boils down to the fundamentals of who is behind the company at first at the early stage in itself. So I mean, when you look at the team, do they have the experience in itself to carry the company further? And then what you look at is like, okay, what is this unfair advantage that company can have in itself to access to the market or scale in itself the product or the service that they are building? And when you look at the team a little bit deeper as well, for the founders who are fundraising, and we see dozens of founders fundraising, we support some of them with our matching service that we have to expose them to investors. Every 2 weeks, we have those pitch events. So we see, I would say, a lot of founders fundraising. And all boils down as well, when you are fundraising, is like, how good do you feel about your company at this stage? And it's very interesting to see like founders who are exhausted, a little bit in the doubt. Even if they're presenting something, the investors will feel it, and you will directly go to category 2 in terms of opportunities for investment. So I think that's something that founders need to always remember, is to make sure that they're able to keep this high energy when they pitch, being able to feel good about what they do, not forgetting that they also know more about their company, the sector that they are developing than the investors in itself. They need to engage in some sort of conversation as well. A lot of investors are looking not just to hear like a sales pitch that goes from slide A to slide 13 itself, but they want to engage in some sort of conversation and understand that the person is really like willing to not teach them, but to explain them how things are going and what's the vision and what are the challenges that eventually they are facing today, and what are the challenges, like how they're going to overcome them in the future. So I think this whole personal aspect when you present your company is very important. Then you need to be able to tell your story very simply. And that's also sometimes it's like founders, I always use this analogy. When you are riding your bike, someone who's on the side of the road and looking at you riding the bike can definitely tell you, maybe you should push or stand a bit more straight, pay attention in front of you, there is this hole and whatsoever. So what is important there is like you need to be able to step back and be able to explain simply your story, and during that pitch deck that you have, really encapsulate and not have like 5 or 10 different opportunities of business model, 5 or 10 subcategories in the market in itself, because it creates confusion. Investors become sometimes a little bit binary, and they need something simple that they can see that you are able to execute on it. So I think that's also something very important, is really like the way how you express yourself and tell the story to the investors. And then lastly, I think it's a number of games as well. You need to be exposed to a lot of investors to find the right fit in itself. And when you feel that there's no fit there, don't keep the conversation going on for weeks or months. It's a lost cause, and you better to spend that time to move back to other investors that you can connect with. So speaking and getting this validation in itself, so exposing yourself, getting also some visibility, and having people that can eventually expose you or connect you to investors is something also very important to increase, I would say, the odds of your fundraising journey. I don't know if that's helpful in itself.
Yeah.
It's kind of like the basics in itself. And then at the end of the day, you need to have a business. You need to be able to explain that you're creating something that will create revenue, will create capital, and that the investors also get excited about it, because again, they have their own constraint of like fund return that they need to achieve. So that's why they're also looking for potential outcome and exit that can make sense.
No, that makes sense. So good advices to founders. It's first, get a real business that actually works and that's viable. But within that business, embrace the founder's life. It's full of challenges and it's a bumpy road. Just embrace it. It is tough, but it's tough for everybody. The second that you mentioned is keep it simple in your communication. It's important to communicate that idea simply to investors so they can grasp it and eventually dig into the due diligence, but that's at a later stage. And the third one is strategize and prioritize. You need to figure out, when it's a loss and when it's a win, and you need to bet onto the right horses. So we have a couple of questions in the chat. So I also welcome everybody to start like writing down in the chat. And so we have one first from Andre, which is, what are the top 3 regulatory changes that would drive success of a green tech startup, in your view, in Europe, probably, because regulatory is very Europe focused?
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't have like a strong view on the regulatory aspect of it. So, I'm not claiming that I'm an expert there, but I think it's been in the making for a long time, but I think the carbon tax in itself that has been, on the European side for a long time is still not in place fully. Will definitely create like a lot of, I would say, incentive to reduce. In fact, this green premium that, as Bill Gates mentioned, this green premium is basically like the difference between like the price that you are able to sell your new service or I would say product that you are putting out there versus the regular one that is more, it has a larger impact in terms of CO2 or impact in general. So having a carbon tax that can basically balance back this green premium and make like a product similar in itself at the price parity will definitely be one of the game changer that we should look for. And that will incentivize also relocalization of the production in itself. And I think that definitely will have a huge impact for the European in itself economy and creating a tons of opportunity for local, I would say, entrepreneurs and therefore investors as well.
Okay, and so the second question from Andre is also tapped into this EU regulatory landscape. Of course, there's been some initiatives on both sides of the pond, both in the US and the EU, in unlocking funds. I think when we're talking about the EU, there's some great set of new regulations on the SFDR, the whole reporting of large corporates, and of course all those startups facilitating this reporting. That will happen very soon, and we'll see how exactly that plays out. The US, in my view at least, what I see, and also from the startups that we are making due diligence on, they don't really have such a strong regulatory boundaries. At least they can start creating businesses in the US that are more driven by business rather than by regulations. So I think that unless, Guillaume, you have a different view on this, but I would expect that the EU will be part of, as always, will part of pushing the regulations further, and then eventually the US will follow to a certain extent.
Yeah, I think I'm always like, when I look also at companies, and you probably do the same, the regulatory framework, and I would say the regulatory tailwind, it's always a little bit like a danger in itself if a company is just like going into a business because that regulation is in place. I think it's like, the danger there is like, if that regulation for is changing, then would the business still be viable? Do they provide a real like or innovation or I would say like a new service in itself that consumers on the B2B side or the B2C side are willing to pay for? And I think the regulation aspect in itself is interesting to maybe encourage the acceleration of new sectors within, I would say, the industry in itself. But I'm always cautious of like, is that really the key for that company to survive? Is the same as like, if you don't get a carbon credit, for instance, then you don't. I mean, if you're not selling carbon credit, you're not like having a business that can be viable. So to me, it's always a little bit like this give and take. I think it's important when you evaluate a company, but at the same time, at core, how is the business going at first, and would they be able to sell with the regulation? The regulation is kind of like I would say sometimes the cherry on top of the cake. Or at least that's my viewpoint. What do you think, Max?
Yeah, I think you're definitely right in the creation of value. It needs to be driven by something bigger than just regulations. What we've seen, and we've invested into some of those businesses that are helping those companies matching and at least being able to start reporting properly on the SFDR in Europe, but also on other regulations in different geographies. We feel that there is it's a strange sell, because some of those companies are definitely willing to start communicating on the CO2 footprint and trying to do better. There's also a large bunch of companies who don't really think about that. They think about regulations first. And therefore, I do agree with you on to figuring out, if suddenly that regulation disappears, there's a large amount of clients that will disappear with it because they're not motivated by doing better on that side, on the climate side. And so it's an interesting thing that we're working with in Europe. I think it's a work in progress at the moment. So everybody's trying to figure out which direction it will take eventually. But we'll probably know more in 5 years' time. There's also a lot of a fund that is regulated in Europe. We also have some reporting measures when we invest in green or climate tech. We also have to report on those investments in certain manner. And I think it's still the very early beginnings of this, and we need to figure out exactly how to do it and how to avoid this complete greenwashing, and try to do the best we can. I think that's going to be as I was saying, work in progress.
But I think it's always also this thin balance between you need regulation, you need that stick time to time to push larger corporation to make the effort that is necessary for them to move. At the same time, you were mentioning reporting and stuff like that, which is great, but we need to always pay attention to not overwhelm those corporation or emerging corporation, or even capital allocator with tons of reporting. That point of time doesn't make sense as well, and slow down the growth and the development of the activity in itself. So it's always this balance. Europeans have the tendency of having regulation on top of regulation and amendment and stuff like that, which sometimes can also be a breakthrough and slow down the activity and the deployment of those new solutions and new technologies in itself. So what is the right balance? You need both, but not too much of each of them. You know what I mean?
Yeah, not to drown founders in new set of regulations that are not designed for them, but eventually that they will have to report on. I think it's a great startup within climate also needs to grow and develop itself properly. But thank you so much for all those answers. I think that was super insightful on many of those aspects. If I can summarize this in a couple of points, I think that we've been discussing about the current landscape of climate tech. We're going back to some kind of a normal. There's still a lot of money deployed. There's still a lot of funds that are available for climate tech founders, but it's not easy, or it's less easy than 2021 at least. And so founders probably will have to work hard. It's a bumpy road, everybody knows it, but they will have to work hard into getting those funding on board. That's one thing for the current investment. We're not teaching anything new here. Of course, everybody knows it's a bit hard. One other aspect is the future. We're quite optimistic from different investors, from different VCs, from different founders, is that there is an increased optimism, especially in climate tech. But we need to be good at strategizing this for the future. So of course, rounds cannot be closed as fast as they were before, and so founders need to be aware of this and start preparing early into the next level of fundraise in order to properly achieve it and properly get the right VCs, the right investors on board. And then the third aspect, and I think that links our two companies, is that help is there. We can definitely have different platforms that can help founders at different stages, at pre-revenue, as Startup Wise Guys is doing. We also have this accelerator program that was really helping scaling and presenting it better, and linking back to what you said, Guillaume, just keeping it simple in the communication. This is also something that Startup Wise Guys is helping tremendous amount of founders to do, be on stage. And if you are a full-on technical founder, it's also okay to be able to pitch and communicate an idea in a very simple way. Even if there's a lot of complexity behind, there's always a way to communicate it. And then, of course, when they're coming to a more seed and planning for Series A, Guillaume and your company, Startup Basecamp, can really help in connecting those founders to a wider ecosystem beyond the natural borders of what those guys have, both in the US and the EU, where you can really connect them with VCs, with other founders to share stories, with experts and so forth. So there's a full amount of help that is available, that we're very happy to take on that challenge with good founders. And so I think, yeah, I will leave it to that, unless Guillaume, you have a couple of closing remarks.
Yeah, I think it's something that we didn't cover, but I think what I noticed in the financing of those, of the startup, and that was the topic today mainly as well that we covered. I think what is a little bit interesting also for founders is to keep in mind that VC is not the only road to finance your business. The venture capital is still very sexy by the press and everything, and we're like more than happy to help that. But there is, if you don't fit in their model of return and short-term return that they are looking at, I think it's important also to look at other source of capital. I mean, at the early stage, you have the grants funding. It can be like very exhausting to find ways to get those grants, but they are there. There's also like high net worth individuals, super angels, family offices who are willing more and more to deploy capital and support business like yours. So I think that's also very important to never forget that if you don't succeed in the VC model at this stage after trying, you can also look with those other alternative source of capital, and then maybe you will come back to a VC model, because then the progress that you did can fit that. And the most important is like you're able to keep financing what you're building, and it can be also very interesting business in itself without being the hyper scalable business that VCs are looking at. And at the end of the day, your solution matters to have a positive impact and creating, positive return for you, your employees, your family, and the world in itself. So I think that's very important, and we need more and more also alternative of those fundings. We need more and more family offices, super angels to also jump into it. And what I feel is sometimes is like it's the exposure of those companies towards that those profiles is still in a way a little bit broken, I feel today. It's everybody who knows everybody that can have access to some deals, but if you want to be efficiently put in front of those source of capital, there is not that many solution out there that can help you to that. So I think there's still progress to be done for 2024, and a lot of I would say exciting opportunities for people who are carrying those exciting projects.
Yeah, that sounds good. But thank you so much for sharing, Guillaume. And so if anyone from the audience would like to connect, feel free to do it on the appropriate channels. I guess LinkedIn would probably be the go-to solution. There's a lot of help we can provide. There's a lot of conversations we're happy to take, and therefore feel free to reach out should you have any questions. And then we'll leave it to it now, and hopefully we can get a quick lunch after that.
Thank you so much, Max, for having me, and looking forward to keep collaborating with you guys. I think you guys are doing a fantastic job to support those founders. So I think it's a very exciting time to be and keep doing that. So thank you so much for having me with you today.
You're welcome. Thank you so much, Guillaume. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.